down your question in Portuguese, Spanish, or English on any sheet of paper. We have some special ones for you here, but you can write it anywhere, and it's anonymous. Okay, so you don't have to be shy. You can just ask anything. Okay, and when I say anything, it's anything. Anybody can connect it to. You have to turn this on. By now? Yeah. So any question goes. Okay, can be about the lectures, can be about in general about science, and can be any other thing. Okay, so but please put in your mind you have to, one question at least per person. Okay, at 6. And then we discuss, you will see what we can answer. So there will be 2 boxes, which are indicated by this sign. One will be here. The other one will be in the computer lab. You can put your question there. Please don't forget this will be a very nice discussion. Okay. So now we have our invited lecturer, Guillaume Le Treut, and from San Francisco, from the Zuckerberg Biohub. And today he will talk about some spatial aspects of epidemics. So thank you, Guillaume.
Okay, hi, everybody. So this is the topic of my talk today. I want to talk about spatial aspects, as Roberto said, and especially the aspect like propagation of a traveling front, and the other aspects such as the interface and how it looks like. I'm a physicist by training, so in this class, I'm going to take a physicist point of view. So if you are yourself a physicist, then a lot of those concepts might look familiar. And if you're not, then just, it might be just a little bit unusual, but maybe there is something that can be insightful. This is the way we try to understand epidemiology. So there are other methods, but this is what I'll be presenting today. Okay. This is what I want to talk about today. I'll start with some, a part where I'm going to explain how waves can form, traveling waves of infections. And then I go into 3 parts which will deal with stochasticity. And when you have stochasticity, the interface, of the propagating front can display some roughness and structure. And I'll try to characterize this using concepts from statistical physics in particular. Okay, so let's start with the first part. This is the model I want to talk about. So suppose you live in a country which is a rectangle, maybe let's call it flat land or something like this. And the question I ask is, my constraint is people only contact each other by nearest neighbor interactions. I can infect my neighbor, but that's it. He can infect his neighbors, and etc. If I drop an infected guy, at the far left, maybe you all have the intuition that the epidemic has to propagate from left to right eventually, right? And maybe you have some sort of intuition that what you'll see is a wave which travels from left to right. And so how do we try to characterize this wave? Well, let's start by writing up the model. So there will be some equation in this talk, but feel free to interrupt me anytime to ask any question. So how do you think about this? Well, as usual, when you're thinking about SIR model, this is a SIR model based, what is the average variation of susceptible individual in a given site? So ij would be the coordinates in this 2D space. So the variation of this number of susceptible individual is going to be equal to the probability that each of them has to get infected times the number of susceptible individual, right? This term here, if I write it down, you can use the formula of total probabilities. The probability of being infected for one guy is going to be equal to the sum over all its nearest neighbors with index KL of what? Of the probability to contact that person, and then the probability that you actually have a successful infection given that you contacted that person. Okay? So now I'm going to express those terms. What is the probability that you are going to meet someone? Well, I'm just saying it's the fraction of infected individuals right there. Okay, so for example, in the same lattice site, it's just the number of infected individual Ij over the population number there. This is the probability that you meet somebody who is infected. And then the probability that you have a successful infection event, given that you meet that person, I'm going to call it alpha delta t. So this is a parameter. And then if you go to the nearest neighbor, the site on the right, this one, well, the number of infected individual is I plus 1 and j, and this is the population. So the ratio of these two numbers is, again, the probability that you meet somebody who is infected. And then given that you met that person, this is going to be the probability that the infection is successful. And so you have like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sites to consider. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 terms. To simplify things, I'm assuming that the population is everywhere the same. So all of this is just capital N. And well, if you just like write this down, you get something like this. Okay. Okay, disclaimer, if I simulate this model, you will observe something like this. So this is just like a simulation any of you can do in one afternoon, and you'll observe this. So this is what we want to try to explain, okay? Yeah. So let's start from this last equation. So if I divide, by delta t on both sides, right? You see, this is a differential, and when delta t is going to go to 0, this gives you the derivative. So the equation you have is this is equal to minus Sij times alpha. Is it me or is it not very? Yeah. Is it better? Or I'm going to try a different one too. Okay, so then I continue. So I have the neighbor to the right, neighbor to the left, neighbor to the top, neighbor to the bottom. Right? And there was a term of 1 over n everywhere, right? But you see, I can also divide both sides by 1 over n. And now, I can absorb this term into S, this one into this S, and that one into each of the i's. And so it just comes to saying that everything is normalized between 0 and 1. Yes? Okay. So, so let's say beta, right? So here, beta is going to be the, okay, let's go this way. It's a rate. So if you multiply it by a small time delta t, this thing here is going to be the probability that you have like a infection during a small interval of time, t plus delta t, given that you're sitting next to an infected person, right? Okay. And alpha, I'm just putting something different because it's where you are, but it could be something different. I mean, those are hypotheses. Yeah, they could be the same. You'd see it doesn't change too much. But so, okay, once I'm going to absorb all those terms there, and so now you can keep in mind, if you want, that all the S and the I's, they are normalized between 0 and 1, right? Okay, but so this is the equation. So let me try to reorganize it a little bit. I'm going to have this minus Sij, and then here I'm going to have this first term for now. And here I'm going to write plus beta I plus 1 j plus I minus 1 j minus 2 Ij. So bear with me for now, this is new. And then I will have again beta, and then those two terms. Okay, so far this and this come from there, these two come from here, and I've added those two terms here, so I'm just going to add them back here so that all in all, it seems like I haven't changed anything. So this is just rewriting, you know, like, and massaging the equations a little bit. Maybe here you recognize the discrete Laplacians. So it's you know, it's second derivative of a discrete quantity, so discrete table. So this I can write it as delta x squared times the second derivative with respect to x. The, you know, I is for the x direction. And this term here would be the Laplacian in the other direction, like the second derivative with respect to y. So this would be delta x squared to second derivative with respect to y of ij. The delta x squared is a normalization because when you take the one derivative, it's a difference over variation. If you take a derivative again, you have the difference of the difference over the variation of the space square, right? Okay, so let's see what we have achieved there. Finally, I obtained that this can be put under the form minus Sij, alpha plus 4, this is the local Iij, and then I got beta, and then this is the okay, so far I've just been rearranging the equations. What? 4 beta. Why 4 beta? Right. Oh yeah, sorry, 4 beta, you're right. Thank you. Good. All right, so, and I'm going to, what do I want to do? Okay, so now let's just write this in the continuum. I'm going to replace I and j by the x and y coordinates. So now, you know, Sij, I replace it by S, x and y, okay? And this equation become what? It becomes a partial derivative because S also depends on time, x, right? So 3 variables. So I got a derivative with respect to S is equal to minus. I'm going to take the beta out of those big parentheses. So I got beta S, right? And then I got alpha over beta plus 4. I plus the okay, so from here we went from discrete to continuous, basically. And I forgot somewhere. This was beta delta x squared. So here I'm going to add also the I'm going to call it L, okay? L square, L is the size of 1 little pixel, so it's what I call delta x before. So this is the equation we got. Now remember, we're trying to understand whether this can produce waves, right? Of course, I wrote the equation for the susceptible, right? But you have similar equations for the infected and recovered, right? As in this here. So, for example, for the other equation for the infected would be d of t of I is equal to minus dts. So this this whole thing. Right? So whoever went away from the insusceptible became infected, so he's welcome in the infected group. And then you have people who recovered with a certain rate, so you have this escape term, okay? All right, so now one more thing. For convenience, you see, I'm going to try to write things very generally. So this is a parameter A I'm introducing, okay? You see that if I take this A out, I have this A beta, and I could divide it on both sides, and this defines a time scale. Okay? So I'm going to change time scale. So I'm saying that T now is actually equal to T times A beta. So when I divide, you know, the ds, just after I divide by the A beta, this is my new time, right? So I've divided on both sides, so I got minus S time I plus L squared over A, and then this dxi plus d squared. So I've redefined time. Now I'm going to redefine the length. I'm going to say, well, x now is going to be equal to x times L over square root of A. And you know, why do I do that? Is because this term here is actually something like this, right? So if I change it to something like this, okay, if I define something like this, I can take this out, L squared over A, and this is going to cancel with this, right? So I'm just doing this so that we arrive to an equation which is simpler. ds over dt is equal to minus S I plus d2x I plus d2y I. Okay, so the coefficient went away because we changed the time scale and the length scale. If I do the same thing here, you know, divide everything by A beta and then redefine the x, I would get something similar, but it's also going to change gamma, right? So once I've divided by A beta in particular, I'm going to have minus d over dt s minus gamma over A beta I. So this is going to be my new gamma, right? I'm going to say gamma now is actually equal to gamma times A beta. So when I make this substitution here, you see this become gamma, okay? Okay. All right, so now we're ready to start thinking about the waves. So how do we do that? Well, we all have this intuition that the wave is going to progress from left to right. So I'm going to say, well, I'm going to look for solutions which look like this. It's only going to depend on time and x. And then I'm going to look for the traveling wave solutions, which can basically be written with something like this, where v is the velocity of the wave. If it is a wave, it has to be able to be written this way. Okay, so now that we have this assumption here, let's try to plug this back into the equations. So I have d over dt of s is now equal to the derivative of this big thing. So it's going to be equal to minus v times s prime x minus vt. Going to call this whole variable z for future references. And then I have the right-hand side, which was this, right? So I have, this should be equal to minus s. I also has to have, yeah, so I'm going to say also, I have the same assumption for I, that it has to have the shape of a wave, like this. So I have the I here from this equation, right? And then I have this Laplacian. The second derivative with respect to x of this thing here, well, you can do it, but you see it's just going to be equal to the second derivative of this new function I of z, right, of z. And then the derivative with respect to y, well, it's 0 because this doesn't depend on y anymore. So this is one equation. And if I do the same thing for I, so the derivative with respect to time is equal to same thing, minus v I prime of what's inside the parenthesis. And then this must be equal to this side of the equation. So minus ds over dt is just this thing, right? So it's plus s I plus I prime. And then the minus renormalize gamma time I. So far I've got this. And you see now you can get, okay, let me just do it. So let's look first at S prime. S prime time minus V is equal to that, right? So, but that thing which I find in this equation is equal to minus Vi prime plus this. So what I've got is that minus Vs prime is equal to minus this, so it's going to be equal to Vi prime minus gamma I. And so in the end of the day, what I've got is, let me write it here, S prime is equal to minus I prime plus gamma over Vi. Okay, I can do similar things with this one. If I want to try to find I prime. This whole thing here, yes. So I'm just going to rearrange this part. What I've got is I double prime is equal to minus V over S time I prime, and then this other term plus gamma over S I. And minus I. This almost looks like an ordinary differential equation, right? And so if you can solve it, you have the whole profile, what the wave looks like. So this function determines the shape of the wave. So this is what we want to know. Does it look like a big wave? Is it a small wave? Is it symmetrical? Is it not symmetrical? This looks like ODE, except that it's not, you see, you have a second order derivative here. So what people do normally is you define an auxiliary function f, such that f prime is equal to I. So now the second derivative of I is actually the first derivative of f. And, well, this one here, I just say it's f. Sorry. It's the opposite. I prime is equal to f, yeah. So the same, and this is f. So why is this good? Because then you have, on the left side, you have derivatives. On the right sides, you have only variable. So this is a first order ODE. Okay. So how do we analyze this? This is what we did so far. How do you analyze this type of equations? So my goal here is to try to get to go as far as possible to, first of all, see if I can determine the shape of the wave, but also see if I can determine what is the velocity, for example, v. Because so far, I said we have a v, but I don't know what it is, right? And in principle, it should depend on the geometry, on the parameter, like the transmission rate and stuff like this. Okay, so so here I have something like this, d over dt of this vector, f, I, s, is equal to something which is a function 1 of f, I, s, and then phi 2 would be a function of f, I, s again, and phi 3 would be a function again of f, I, s. So phi 1, for example, is this line. Phi 2 is for I prime, so it's just this line. And phi 3, it's this line. And well, first thing we can see is, do you have fixed points? Why do we want to know fixed points? Because those are the stable, stationary states. And so if I try to solve this ODE, it should go toward those. And so it's good to know where you're going to end up and if you can backtrack from there. So let's see. This IS equal to 0 means I simply have to solve the equation when each of those lines is equal to 0. And so you see that here I'm going to have, well, if I'm just applying this, well, I must have f equals 0. Maybe this is not surprising. For the SIR model, like the stable state must have no zero derivative for the number of I. This is okay. This is also I prime is also f in this equation, right? If I look at the third equation, so this is 0. It means that minus f plus this is equal to 0. But I just found that f is 0, so it means I is also 0. And then this line, you see, if you set it to 0, well, this is 0, but then I is 0. So I can't really tell anything about s. So s is just something. I don't know what. So these are the stable points. And why do we do that? Is because you might know that when you want to do linear stability analysis, the idea is that I'm going to replace the f, I, and s by something like this. The fixed points, which in that case f star is 0. I'm going to add a small perturbation, which depends on time, right? And then I'm going to do the same thing for I. I add a small perturbation, x2 of t, and s star plus x3 of t. If I just plug this in those equations, well, because x1, x2, and x3 are small, I can Taylor expand these three functions. And so I get something which looks like this. Phi 1 of the optimal value, f star, I star, s star. And then I have a sum over j of phi 1 of the ultimate value times the derivative times xj. And this is evaluated in the stable point. So you have the same things. Like in general, you have phi I at the stable point plus the sum of the d phi I over d xj times xj, and this thing evaluated at the stationary point. This is a fixed point, right? So the star. So we already know that those functions here are equal to 0. Right? Okay. Why is it? And this thing here is called a Jacobian. So let's write it down. So in my case, the Jacobians, if I take I'm first going to take the derivative of the first line with each of those variables. I said the first line is the f line. And the variables, they order like F, I, and S. Derivative with respect to F on this line, it's just minus V over S. And I'm saying I'm evaluating it at the fixed point. So this is my S star. Derivative of this line with respect to I, it's gamma over S minus 1. And evaluated at the fixed point, this is S star. Derivative of this line, evaluated over S. This 0. And then I have I times this derivative. But I star is going to be 0. So eventually, this product is going to be equal to 0. If I continue to the second line, I can do the same thing. There is only one variable, so this one is going to be easy. And then the last line, with respect to F, it's minus 1. Then with respect to I, it's gamma over V. And then this is 0. You may not be familiar with eigenvalue decomposition, but any square matrix can be written as J is equal to U times something which is diagonal times the inverse of this matrix. And U is usually defines a change of variable. Okay. And why is this important is because, okay, do I want to go all the way back to the left? I don't know. Well, if I look at the dynamics of the, so I'm going to define these new variables like this. X are my, F, I, S is equal to X. And this I'm going to say is equal to U, it's a matrix, 3 by 3 matrix, times X prime. This is a new vector. So new F, I, and S, which don't have an obvious physical or interpretation, but just a mathematical transformation. Let's see. So I have, if I write down the derivative of this X prime, I'm writing really the derivative of this X1 prime, X2 prime, X3 prime. Okay. And according to this relation, this is going to be equal to d over dt of u minus 1 times x. So it's going to be equal to u minus 1 times the derivative d over dt of x. But this derivative, I just showed that to first order. This is simply the Jacobian times x, right? And so now if I just put things back together, it's u minus 1 times j times x. Oh, but wait, j, I say, can be written as u times a diagonal matrix. And x, I'd say, could be written like this. Okay, so u minus 1. And then the x is u times x prime. This is the identity matrix. And this is also the identity matrix. So at the end of the day, what you have is that for those new variable, they really behave like a diagonal matrix times the original vector. So basically, it's equal to lambda 1 x1 prime, lambda 2 x2 prime, and lambda 3 x3 prime. And so if you take each line separately, these are just first order ODEs. And so the general solution is easy. It's just going to be something like this. Okay, after all this, the point is that for those points to be stable, you need the system to go back to the fixed points when you have perturbations. And so this system will only go back if you know, the xi quantities goes to 0, which also means this one have to go to 0, and this will only go back to 0 if the eigenvalues are negative. Okay. What time is it? Okay, so I'm going to show the next with the slides. So we have computed this Jacobian matrix, and I've just said that it's important to know what are the eigenvalues to understand if those points are stable or not. So in essence, you have to diagonalize this matrix, and the general procedure to do so is to compute the determinant of a characteristic polynomial. So you would subtract here and you know, add minus lambda. Compute the determinant of this 3×3 matrix. It's relatively easy. And then you get an equation which says that basically one of them is 0, the eigenvalues, and the other two satisfy this equation. And I said, well, I want them to be, in general, I would like them to be negative for the stable point to be stable, the fixed point to be stable. But actually here, what I really want to have is something which is physical. It makes sense. You know, when we started at the beginning of the lecture, I wrote this for the derivative of the susceptible, right? And you see that it's minus time a big thing. But all of these things are positive, right? So as usual in the SIR model, S can only decrease monotonously. It cannot do anything crazy. And the fact that it cannot do anything crazy means that you cannot have, for example, oscillations. And so it forbids those eigenvalues to be anything else but real. You cannot have complex eigenvalues. Once you like enforce this condition on this 0 is obviously real, and this one, it's a second order polynomial equations. You know how to solve it. You compute the determinant. And this condition basically enforces that, this is an exercise, you can do it. This enforces that the velocity must be larger than a certain critical values. So at the end of this, what did we gain? Well, I can tell you for sure that the velocity of these waves is larger than this. And this involves the parameter of the model, right? The gamma is this one, right? So it depends on gamma, depends on A, which was a function of the alpha and the beta rates, and that's it. Okay, so if I plot those F, I, and S variable, if I numerically solved this ODE, I get something like this, right? Depending where I start. So this would be the phase space, and I just said that the fixed points you must have F and I equal to 0, so it would be one of these points. I forgot what was the correspondence. I know -1, it's normally between -1 and 1, so I forgot if -1 is 0 or 8 if it's 1. But one of those two red dots is the fixed point, and then S can vary. Anyway, okay. We got something. We got the mean velocity, but we got the condition on the velocity. But we can get a little bit further, and to do that, well, I'm not going to derive it to write it down now because I think I'm going to run out of time otherwise. But I can show you what are the steps, and everything boils down to noticing that, you know. Okay. So the equation of the I is something like this. di is equal to minus plus S, and then I say it was I plus second derivative minus gamma I. So if I just, S is smaller than 1, because I said at the beginning I normalized everything by the populations. So this is smaller than I plus the second derivative with respect to X minus gamma I. And this is equal to, you know, basically this second derivative with respect to I plus 1 minus gamma time I. And this rings a bell if you have taken some classes in physics, because it looks like a famous equation, which also display waves, and which is called the Fisher-Kolmogorov equation. So this is the equation, and this equation is basically describes waves where you have a stable phase, in that case, like infectious people, which invade a phase which is not stable, like people who are like spaces where you have like everybody susceptible and no infectious. This is not stable. You have one perturbation and everything starts to get infected. So this equation, if you solve it numerically, for example, you get something like this. So initially there is a transient behavior, and then you see it forms a wave front with a given shape, and then you have a wave propagating toward the left. So the state here is the axis here is h. So on the right side, when h is equal to 0, or if number susceptible is equal to 1, this is unstable. And so on the right is when h is equal to 1, or if you want, when the number of susceptible is close to 0. And whenever the wave reaches that side of space, it triggers the reactions, and so it propagates basically. There are things which have been proved for these equations. In particular, this is a more general way to write it, and this f of h in our case would simply be this thing. So this is the f of I. And you have a bunch of theorems which were proved, already a few, not so recently. And in particular, if you have this condition, this function f, then you know for a fact that this must give rise to waves which travel at a given velocity equal to 2 times the square root of that. So if I compute the square root of f prime of 0, I obtain actually 2. I obtain 2 times. If you take the derivative of that, is simply 1 minus gamma. So it's exactly what we computed earlier, except that before we said it was a lower bound. Here, it's an equality. The only limitation is, well, it's not exactly my equation. Like I have an inequality there. But you can actually, think about it a little bit. Suppose I have like some function I tilde which satisfies exactly this equation. I know this one is going to travel at a velocity which is what I wrote here, or like this one. I know it. If I initialize, I tilde to the same value of I, what I've got is that I have at all time the derivative of I with respect to t is always smaller according to this inequality to this one. Well, in other words, everywhere I can never be larger than I tilde. And so it means that the waves that you see with the SAIFR model on this 2D land, it has traveled at a velocity which cannot be larger than the velocity of I tilde. Otherwise, it will pass it, right? Which violates this equation, this inequality. And so you get another bound. You get, okay, then the velocity of the wave which interests me must be smaller than the velocity of this I tilde. And so it's smaller than this. And now you combine this result with the other bound that I showed you before, this one. And we basically have determined that actually it's not a bound, it's an equality. And so we have determined what is the velocity of those waves on this 2D geometry. Whenever you have this equality, this is called a pooled wave, and it says that it falls into the university class on the Fisher-Kolmogorov equations. And this is just some numerics. If you solve numerically this ODE that I wrote here, you get the full profile, right? So these are profile that you would get for different value of this rescale gamma. That's the only parameter left in this ODE, basically. So you see if you change it, this would be the wave profile for the susceptible people. This is going to travel from left to right. And this would be the profile for the infected individuals. And this is also the shape of the wave traveling from left to right. As for the velocity, if I plot the position of the wave, so basically the tip here, as a function of time for different value of gamma, I get something like this. Initially, well, there is a transient regime, and then, boom, it reached like a stationary state where you have the wave traveling. And so it traveled at a certain velocity, so the position increased linearly in time. And so the slope, which is the velocity, changes when you change gamma. Okay, if you do simulations, like like the movie I showed you at the beginning, you see that it falls perfectly on those predictions. Okay, so this was just to show you, in a case which is relatively simple, you can have results which are non-trivial. And I wanted to show you how using concepts of physics, like the Fisher-Kolmogorov equation, for example, and methods from applied mathematics, like linear stability analysis, you can get insights on the waves, in particular compute the velocity. Now I want to switch gear a little bit and ask the question, well, this is all nice, but it's all deterministic, right? What happens now if I have some noise in the system? Can you say similar things? Let's think a little bit. So this is what we just discussed. Now let me consider, just for the sake of the example, that I have a similar setup, but instead what's happening is I drop several people at the beginning, drop them at the left and leave them free to wander. Just tell them you have to infect people. And they're going to just like walk erratically, so it's a random walk. And I'm wondering, where are they going to end up at a certain time? So this is also probably going to give rise to some sort of wave, right? Because it's kind of similar to this. But is the position, again, going to increase linearly in time? How does this setup where you have like this type of randomness change the picture we got from deterministic considerations? You have some studies in the literature. This is a model where the author were trying to compute. Suppose you have like some prey, like tigers or whatever in the jungles, and they are trying to. You want to know what territory they're covering. You have a pack of them, and each of them has their own territory. And so, what is the overall territory they're covering? So the tiger would be the red dots, and they're moving around, and the white sides of the site they visited, it's their territory, and the black ones, it's the Wild West. So no tiger there. And basically, the number of visited sites or their territory is going to increase with time because they walk and they, at some point they're going to get away of the center, and explore further and further territory. But the way this white patch grows is not trivial at all. So, for example, initially you have a regime where the volume of this white patch grow like t to the power of the dimension of the space, so t to the power of 2 here. And then it becomes t to the power d over 2. So in that case, it would be grow linearly in time. And then you reach another regime where you have saturation. So linearly in time might be what I told you before, but the other two are different. So this was not for epidemiology, more ecology, but let's see if we can do similar things for our case, which is epidemiology. And for that, I'm introducing this model. It's a model of random walkers. So what's happening is you have like a lattice like this, where initially everybody is susceptible. So black sites here, gray sites are susceptible. And then I drop somebody who's infected somewhere, and that person can walk for a number of steps. It's the duration of time during which it remains infectious. After that, it's cured. But during that time, it's officially infectious and it can infect people. And what's happening, this person moves like randomly, so it's a random walk. And every time it visits a site which is black, so susceptible, it can do two things. It can either infect that person, and in that case, the site is labeled as visited, and the person who was sitting on this site becomes another infected random walker and can start to roam the lattice and infect other people. Or when it reaches there, it can maybe not infect that person, and then just continue and move on. And at the end of the, whenever you reach a number of steps where it's not infectious anymore, you just like stop it there and you terminate this walker. And just for the fun of it, we also introduced the possibility for this walker to do some rare jumps to distant sites with a distribution which is some sort of Levy distribution, so a big variance. Okay, is that clear? Yeah. So if you simulate this, you get something like this, where in this picture, the black are the susceptible, and then the white are the recovered ones. So recovered, is whenever the infected person recovers, it recovers there, and so it stays there. And then the blue are the visited one, and the red are the position of the active random walker who are infectious. So initially you have something like this, and then as time goes on, you can see it starts to morph into a propagating front. So a very similar picture as I was showing before. And in this model, for example, you can compute what is the velocity. And in the spirit of the tiger and the territories, it's actually not trivial. You have a regime where you have three regimes again. Initially, you have like the position increase as the time to an exponent which is close to 0.8. And then there is a regime where the position increase as time to the power of an exponent which is almost 1.5. And then you reach a regime where it seems like it's growing linearly, which is like kind of what we had with the deterministic case. So a long time scale, you get back the deterministic behavior, but initially you don't. And this is kind of universal. You can change the parameter of the model, you change the probability of infecting others, and you always get the same three phases, and the exponents are, the same. Only the time at which you change from one regime to the other change, but that's it. Something that this model gives you, and that's, I think, interesting, is it triggers the question, is R naught a good way to characterize an epidemic? Because we all know about the R naught. And so it's roughly the definition is the number of secondary infection caused by somebody who's infectious. So in this context, well, what is R naught? Well, an infectious person is infectious during tau steps. At every single time steps, it has a probability P to infect somebody else. So the number of secondary infection is the product of those two, in first approximation. So it's P times tau. So here I'm showing to you 3 lines, and all of them, they have the same P times tau. Right? So same R naught. But when you look at them, they are qualitatively quite different, actually. And so it raised the question, is R naught the best way to categorize epidemics? I don't have an answer for that, but just wanted to share that with you. Yeah, so you can, for example, run all these simulations for different values of the parameter. P, probability of infecting. Tau, duration of time until you recover. And every time you can try to compute the effective R naught. Another way to look at this is every time you do another simulation, I'm going to label, compute the probability that the epidemic dies out or propagates. I just run several simulations, and sometimes it stops, and sometimes it propagates. So once I average, I get rough estimates of the probability that the epidemic continues to propagate. And so in red is the probability that it dies out, and in yellow, it's the probability that it propagates. And you see, like, you have basically like this boundary which separates those two regions. It seems like I'm telling you now, it has a slope of -1. So if I told you that in first approximation, R naught is equal to P times tau. So if I do log of R naught, this is equal to log of P plus log of tau. So the log for a constant R naught, log of P is equal to minus log tau plus log R naught. So those are lines with slope -1, which you're seeing there, and the intercept is the R naught. So each of those parallel lines is different values of R naught, and the one which is here, this light green one, is the critical R naught. So in that case, it is R naught is equal to 1, right? So if your R naught is larger than 1, then the epidemic propagates, and it's below that, then the epidemic dies out. But you have many different types of epidemic for a given R naught. And this actually you can, but it's sort of involved calculation, but you can get a better, the exact value for this model. So its first approximation is p times tau, and then you have some correction terms. Okay, so 15 minutes. Okay. So I talked before about, I talked about the deterministic case. I've introduced you with this stochastic model that I'm going to use as a recurring example to compare with other things I'm going to go through. And one of the questions you could ask is, what about the interface? Is there anything interesting to say about it? So this is how the interface looks like in green. And I mean, if you zoom in, it's kind of rough. I don't know if you are familiar with fractals, but it almost looks like a fractal. And you could ask if this is also an important properties of epidemic which propagates. How do I compute this? Well, this is it in mathematical terms. If you are mathematically inclined, you can read it. Otherwise, you just have to imagine that the black C here is the C of susceptible individual. It's a big connected component. And the boundary is all of the sites in that black C, which are neighbors with a site belonging to the complementary. Right? So anything which was infected, visited, or recovering. Right? And so this allows me to write, to draw this boundary. And this brings me to different parts, which I called scaling laws and dynamical exponents. I'm going to erase the board so I can breathe a little bit. Actually, maybe let me show this next slide first. Studying interfaces is not the sole privilege of epidemiologists. It occurs in many other contexts. So here is a few other contexts. The first one is if you come from a place where you have harsh winters, if you look at the window in your car and it's cold outside, you'll see that you can have some sort of ice which forms and grows on the glass like this. And so basically the water comes from the top and then it starts to roll down the glass. And because at the bottom of the glass you have frozen water, then it freezes when it touches the interface. And it makes the pattern that you see on this slide. Another example is if you're more a biologist and you've grown some bacteria before, maybe you know how colonies grow on Petri dishes. And so this is B. subtilis. It's a rod-shaped bacteria which initially live in the soils. And when you cultivate it in the lab, it grows and it forms like patterns like this. So you also see interfaces, which seems rough. Another example is forest fires. If you take a satellite picture from an ongoing fires, what you see is you would have like the propagating front in red, and then you have the ashes in black of whatever was burned. And if you look at the boundary between that and the green lens, then it also has the rough interface property. And a final example is if you think about the coastlines. So from the point of view of the sea, if you were like the ocean or Poseidon, I don't know, and you are trying to propagate into the land, well, you're eating out the land by erosion, basically, right? And so doing this, you also like eat on the land, and this process creates very rough coastlines, which also are the interface between the land and the sea, and they also have this very convoluted and rough properties. So how do we describe this? I'm going to give you a physics perspective about it, and this is a toy model. It's called the ballistic deposition model. And you know, I mean, if any of you ever played to Tetris, it's pretty close. So suppose you have something like a setup like this, where you have like a line or like a screen, I don't know. And then at random, you have like new bricks which come from the top, and they pick a column at random, and then they fall vertically to the to the bottom, and they stick to whatever they encounter on their path. With this ballistic deposition model, the bricks can either fall straight and then they stick to the previous brick which was in this column, but they can also stick to the left laterally. If on their way they meet, there was a neighboring column which had the high brick, for example, then they would stick to that. And because of this, this is a simulation of this that you could do easily on a computer, and you get patterns like this where the white is void and the black are the bricks, and then the gray coloring is just like it denotes like the time at which the bricks were sent to the top of the screen, right? So you have big voids, right? But also if you look at the top, which is interface, it has this structure which again display like some roughness. To describe this a little bit, I'm going to formally introduce a couple of things. L is going to be the size of your screen, so or whatever you have there, and then I'm going to describe what is the mean height here of the interface is really going to be equal to the average over all the columns. So each column has a certain height, and then I just compute this sum divided by n, and this is the average height of the interface. And you expect over a long time that this interface grow linearly in t, as we've already seen. Something else you can look at is the width, because we've been talking about some of them are very circumvoluted. So how do you think about this? Well, one way is to consider the width, and in that context, the width would be the standard deviation of the height. And if you don't know what the standard deviation is, it's simply you take the variance, which is the sum over the difference between the height and the mean height. You square this, and then you average this, and then the square root of that gives you the. There is a typo here. It's 1 over square root of it. And this gives you the width. Okay. And now, so these processes have been well studied, and like this in physics context, and especially with those toy models, and they always exhibit similar behavior. So this is time, and if I try to plot what is the width, which is a function of maybe the time, obviously, and maybe the size of your box, how does it typically look like? Well, if I do a log-log plot, typically, initially, it grows as a certain power law. Sorry. So this is a line in log-log plot saying that in that regime, W grow as a power law, so which is T over power with the power beta. I'll show you some examples, but amazingly, it's almost always the case. And then you reach a certain time when the behavior change, and this is the crossover time. And when you reach crossover time, you reach a saturation regime where basically the width stops increasing. It's like the wave is in the stationary phase. It found its shapes, and so the properties stop to change. And so the width is constant, and you have W, which is equal to saturation value. And interestingly, this saturation seems to scale with L to another exponent alpha. Okay, so I've defined alpha and beta so far. And if you repeat that, you change L, you change the deposition rate, you try to change a little bit the model. You're going to change the crossover time, but it seems like it always also scale like L to the power Z. These results initially were quite empirical, so I don't really have a good justification. You just do the experiment, and you observe that this is the case. So these, for example, these curves, you see those are different experiments, and each of those, initially they grow like t to the power beta, and then there is a crossover, which are different. So this one has a crossover time, which is around here, and this one has a crossover time, which is around there, so different. And then they reach stationary phase or saturation phase, and this W-sat is different from each of those. But here I would like to, how do you write this in one equation? So this can be written with what are called, it's a typical case where you want to use scaling functions and scaling relations. Well, maybe you can see it as a little trial and error. First of all, if I divide the times by t cross here, I'm going to align all of those transition points in time, right? So this crossover, and this crossover, they're going to be aligned on the t-axis, like this. But they still have different saturation value for W. So if I divide all of the W by the saturation value, which is that, then all of this saturation part, they also are aligned like this. So this is a way to collapse the data. So you rescale the length, rescale the time, and then everything falls into one curve, which is universal in the sense that it is the same for many different macroscopical models, and it characterizes, it's a way to classify the physics in them. Okay, so this function that you see here, or that here, or that's the solid line. It's basically so let's call the value of t over z in this plot is u. Initially, it must grow as u to the power beta, and then it's equal to 1, basically. So it's the function I wrote here. So what I have is that the rescale w is equal to a function of u is equal to the rescale time. And the function f, the log of it, is such that initially it grows like a power law, u to the power beta, and then it's equal to f infinity, if you want, which is equal to 1. So now if you just reorganize everything, what you have is w is equal to L to the power alpha times f of t over t cross. And I've said before that the t cross is the time to some power z. And if you think a little bit, there is a way to relate those exponents. And in particular, you know that for t, which is smaller than t cross, equal this, you must have w lt, which is equal to L to the power alpha. And then initially, I said that the f is equal to u to the power z. To u to the power z here is t over Lz to the power beta. And so this is equal to L alpha to the power alpha minus beta z, t to the power beta. But this, I've said, it should only scale with time. And so because of that, it implies that this, to kill the dependence of L, you must have alpha, which is equal to beta z. So these are called the scaling relations. like this. And those exponents, they, as I said, they are sort of universal. They characterize the dynamics, and they don't really depend on the microscopical rules. So for example, I've talked about this ballistic deposition model, and for this model, those are the exponents, 1/2 and about 1/3. If you change the rule a little bit and you say that instead of only sticking laterally, you can also stick to diagonally like this to some brick you encounter, then the exponents are the same. Now, if you change significantly the rules and you say, for example, you only fall to the bottom, so this is exactly Tetris, then you have different exponents. Oops. And then you can modify the rules again from this model and say, well, okay, let's do Tetris, but then if you reach the top, you're still going to look left and right, and if there is a lower point, you're going to jump there. You know, it's like you have some inertia. You arrive there, then left, right, and if it's lower on the right, I'm going right. And so this is called random deposition with diffusion. You have different exponents. And this is a model for the formation of colonies, which is called the Eden model. And this one has the same exponents as those first two, so it's the same universality class. So you can categorize your models or using these exponents. What time is it? Okay. Yeah, I think I have time. So this is nice, but maybe you wonder, a lot of it seems, half empirical and half rigorous, and you're right. And people have tried for a long time to come with, theoretical explanations about what they were saying. And I'm going maybe just to talk to this about these formalisms. So this equation here is called the Edwards-Wilkinson equation, and it's a model for this random deposits model with diffusion. And basically, you have on this equation one side which tells you how the heights vary as a function of x. So it's the change in the height of one column at the point x. And this can vary basically because noise, right? You have random deposition. So at a certain rate, you have bricks falling. So it's going to increase because of that. And then because the particles can run down and go to come from above, you have like this term here, which smoothes the interface because that's what it's doing. So you have those two components. This is a breakdown of the different terms in this equation. So this would be, let's say you start with a profile of height like this. This would be the Laplacian, so this first term. And once if you have no noise, once you update this differential equation with the Laplacian, you get something like this, where basically what you've done is you've smoothed the interface a little bit. This is a good, I thought I would spend some time showing you how you can rigorously compute such scaling exponents. So you have something like dH over dt is equal to this nu times the Laplacian of h plus some noise, right? And by noise, it's something like it's not a Gaussian noise because it cannot really be negative, right? You only add stuff. But in first approximation, let's say it's Gaussian. And it's Gaussian in such a way that if you try to compute the covariance between any pair, time and position, it's going to be equal to something like 2d delta t minus t prime, delta x minus x prime. So this is called the Gaussian white noise, and basically say that noise between different positions or between time points are uncorrelated. And at a given position, it's white noise with a variance, Gaussian noise with a variance given by 2D. And the argument here is going to be the following. you know, if you think of diffusing particles, for example, you have a very small particle diffusing in a cell, like a protein. It's very small, and it's diffusing. And then I'm dropping, I don't know, a big plastic ball in the ocean. It's also going to diffuse, right? Or, I don't know, you could consider a particle of pollen in a glass. It has a diffusing motion. Do those motions look the same to you or not? I don't know. Well, maybe you have the intuition that they're going to look slightly different because maybe the protein diffuses faster, so it moves more rapidly. And it is, you know, so the diffusion coefficient is larger. But let's say now that I slow down the movie, so I rescale time, and then I increase, I zoom in on my picture, right? So that I rescale the scale too. I think it's going to be very difficult for you to tell me which one is the protein and which one is the pollen particle. And so this is a case where you want to see, like, after rescaling, it seems like the physics or the things that are happening look the same. So they should be indistinguishable. And so what I'm going to do right now with this equation, you could do the same with the diffusion equation. And I have the same argument that after you rescale time and space, they should look the same, basically. So I'm going to say, OK, I'm going to rescale the time. X become b times x, where b is my new time scale. So I'm basically zooming in or, you know, or zooming out, you know, on the side of the screen. And then I'm expecting also that, you know, if I compress the screen up or down, I'm going to find a way, like the sweet spot, where it's going to always look the same than another model, for example. So I'm going to rescale h. By what? Well, I just said that the natural length scale here for this, you know, for the y-axis, it's this L to the power alpha. So it's basically going to scale by b to the power alpha times h. And then I'm going to slow down the movie or accelerate it. So I'm going to rescale time as well. And I've just said that the natural unit of, you know, way to rescale time for these problems is by putting, is basically something like L to the power z. So the time here, I'm going to rescale it like b to the power z times t. OK, so let's see. I want, at the end of the day, to arrive to an equation dh prime over dt prime, which is nu time the Laplacian of h prime plus this new eta prime, right? That's how you basically say that it should look the same. OK, so let's break it down. I said h prime is equal to b alpha times h. So I'm going to take it out. So I have b alpha dh. And then dt prime, I've said t prime is this. So basically, I've got b over z dt. I continue. I have nu, the gradient of something. This h prime, again, it's this thing, so I can take the b alpha out. And what I'm left with is with this second derivative of h time over d x prime square. X prime, I've just said it's b times x. So basically, this is going to be equal to b squared dx. And then I have this eta prime. So far, what I've got is b alpha minus z dh over dt is equal to b to the power alpha minus 2 nu d2h over dx squared. So this is the Laplacian. I'm doing it in 1D just to simplify. And then I have this noise. How does this one renormalize? Well, you're going to use this one. So I want it to be similar. So I want to have a Gaussian white noise. So I want that n prime of a certain time t1 and x1 prime. So this, I want it to be equal to 2D times the delta of T1 prime minus T2 prime times the delta function of x1 prime minus x2 prime, right? So exactly the same as here with my normalized coordinates. So if I make the change, this is equal to 2D now of delta, the renormalized time, I say it's a b to the power z, T1 minus T2. And then delta, and then this difference is going to be b x1 minus x2. So I just make the substitutions. And now I'm going to use the properties of the delta function. I can do it as an exercise, but I'm going to use the fact that a times delta function of a times the variable is equal to the delta function of the variable. And so using this formula, what I'm getting now is that this is equal to 2d, b to the power minus z, minus, this is a d-dimensional space in general, so I'm going to put d. And this is d delta t1 minus t2, delta x1 minus x2. So putting this back here, if I want to replace the new noise by using the old one, I see that it has a new scale, and this is the variance. So if you want the scale or the standard deviation is square root of that. So I get something like b to the power minus z plus d over 2 times the old noise. Oh, okay. Okay. Okay, so this is the equation we're at. This is after we renormalized the space and time. And again, I want it to be basically look the same as before. And so the only way to make it look the same as before, well, I'm going to do one more thing. So I've got dh over dt. I'm going to just put that term here on the right side. So if I divide by this, I got b to the power z minus 2 mu d2h over dx squared plus b. So z minus z over 2, it's simply z over 2. Then minus alpha, and then minus d over 2. And so the only way to have it the same as before is by making sure all those exponents are 0, so it doesn't depend on d. And so you see that I obtain z equal to 2. And then the other equation is alpha is equal to z minus d over 2. And so beta, we say, is simply the ratio of those, so it's going to be equal to z minus d over 4. So this is what you see. So z is equal to 2, right? So, okay, change this. Okay, so this is what you observe here. So it was a bit long, but I just wanted to, this is a very important types of argument in physics, scaling arguments, and it allows you to, derive those exponents from some theory, which is not trivial. Okay, this is not your best shot for an equation describing the interfaces. That was historically an important one. Now the gold standard is the so-called KPZ equation. It's basically the same, but you have a new term here, which is used to describe lateral growth. So lateral growth, like the one I was talking about at the beginning. And so this is now like basically, whenever you talk about growing interface, this is what we think about. This gives rise to slightly different exponents. I'm not going to do it again and also because it's more complicated than with this one. But you can also compute dynamical exponents for that. And you see that you get, for example, 1/2, 1/3, and 3/2. If you replace d by 1 here, those are equal basically to those exponents of the, so 1/2 and 1/4, right? So 2 minus 1 over 2 is 1/2. 2 minus 1 over 4 is 1/4, so you recover those. And here in the same way, if you use the KPZ to describe the other type, then you recover the right exponents. And after all this time, let's go back to our initial epidemiological model. It turns out you have the similar properties. If I make, so I define the interface like I showed you in the beginning. I have, let's say, the width of this interface, and what was L in my example is now the height of the box. I can run the simulations for different value of H, so narrow box, wide boxes, and things like this. And you see that I always get the same similar type of curves. And once I do it grow like, the widths still grow like t to the an exponent beta. And then once you do some rescaling, everything collapses into a curve just like I showed to you before. And so all of this was because I wanted to say, well, this is a very interesting case, because it turns out that we obtain those exponents, but they are not found, as far as we know, in the literature that you can find in physics. So it's sort of like a new model. And I mean, if you have any idea, please come talk to me, and I would be really happy to hear about it. But so it's a case where the general methods applies, but then you get something which is maybe like a new class of interface growth. Okay, we have 5 minutes left, I think. So I'm going to go relatively quickly on the next part. Okay, the next part is the fractals. Because you might have, I said in the beginning, the interface looks like it's a fractal a little bit. So what are fractals? In general, you could say, how do we define the volume of an object? I don't know, I give you I don't know, a shape like this. Well, you could say, well, I don't know. I don't have many tools, so I'm going to say, well, I'm going to use, I have this little disk. I'm going to try to cover this thing with disks. And I know their size, so basically I can compute what is their areas, right? So I do this the whole time, and then I say, well, my estimation for the volume of this blue curve is going to be that the volume is equal to the number of disks I got times their individual volume, which for the disk is pi times L squared, right? And this you can generalize to many dimensions. And of course, if you want something more refined, a better estimates, you have to go with smaller disks. And if you only have big disks, then your estimate is going to be rather crude. But so this is what I wrote here, right? The volume in general is equal to n times the number of an object. And you might think that, in principle, the volume of when you take smaller and smaller disk, you're going to converge to a certain value for the volume of this blue shape. Yeah, and you're right. But there are some objects, like the fractals, in which it's not the case. The more you zoom in, the more you find. And then it seems like the volume grows. And so, so for non-fractal, if you have, so non-fractal, at some point, V is equal to a constant. And so if I combine with this, I obtain basically that n times L to the power D is a constant. A constant means it's of order 1, basically, right? And so basically, the number of tiles grow at L to the power minus D. But for fractal object, this is not true. And then you have a different D. It's called the fractal dimension. And the result is that the volume grows as D minus DF, the more you zoom in. And so if you look intensely at those relationships, you can see that if you take the logarithm of n and you divide by log of 1 over L, it gives you basically df, right? And so with the understanding that this is valid when L goes to 0. So how do you, maybe a couple of examples. This is a famous example. It's called Cantor dust. So the way you construct this is you start with a line, and you break it in 3 equal pieces. I delete the middle one. And then I repeat. So this one, divide in 3, delete the middle one. And you do this forever. And this forever is your fractal object. But for my illustration, let's start from this, this side here. So if I start from this, okay, how many, I'm going to make a table. This is an iteration number. This is a number of tiles I will need to cover it. And L is, so a tile in that context is 1D, it's a line, right? I have pieces of little rods. And okay, so starting from the bottom here, if I have only one line, one rod which is of size 1, so it is basically my rod is this big one. Well, basically to cover the fractal, I just have to drop it on the whole thing, and that's the best I can do with the rod I have. So in that case, I have only one. Now, if the length of my rod is 1/3, right? How do I cover the pattern on the bottom? Well, I drop this one on these 4, and this one on these 4s, and it's covered. So I only need 2 of those rods of size 1/3. Now let's say I'm taking again smaller rods. I'm taking rods, these ones, so these ones are the big one divided by 3 divided by 3, so it's 1/3 squares. And if I want to cover the pattern in the bottom, well, I need, it's here, you need 1 for these 2, 1 for these 2, etc., so you need 4. And now you see, maybe you see a pattern. In general, I would need 2 to the power k rods to cover the fractal, and using rods of length 3/k. So if I try to compute the fractal dimension, it's going to be the limit when the length of the rod goes to 0, which in that case is when k goes to infinity, of log of nk over log of 1/lk. So this is going to be equal to, so nk, I say it's log of 2 to the power k, and this is log of 3 to the power k, and you can see that this is equal to log 2 over log 3. And for example, this is a fractal dimension of, well, I forgot to mark it down, so I don't know. Well, it's smaller than 1. But basically it tells you this is the fractal dimension of this object. You can do this construction for many different types of fractal. Another one is the so-called Cox snowflake. So here the construction is like this. Every time you break this line into 3, and then you make a triangle in the middle. And this forms snowflakes. And those are fractal objects. They are called self-similar. In physics, you find many other objects which are almost fractal in the sense that if you zoom in, it seems like it's the same thing as when you were looking from above, but in a slightly different way. So they are said statistical fractals or random fractals. For example, this is a random walk in blue. And I could define blobs of length b prime, which contains, I don't know, a few of those blue. And I group them like this, maybe 10 by 10. And now if I was zooming out and look at the black, they would look very similar to the blue ones. So it is a self-similar type of object, but the way they are organized into the blobs is random, so it is a random fractal. And so you can show that you have scaling relations here. I don't have time to go into it now, but you can also compute fractal dimensions. And the relation with the epidemiology is, in our case, well, the interface, you can construct the tiling. So here I have the interface at the beginning, and I'm tiling it with bigger and bigger tiles, like exactly what I explained here with the blue curve. And with this process, you're just counting the number of tiles you need, the size of the tiles, and applying this formula, you're going to be able to compute the fractal dimensions. So for example, in this case, we found that this model for the epidemiological growth of the interface had a fractal dimension of 1.2, which is much smaller than 2. Yes, so I'm not sure there is a good explanation of why it is this value, but it's an interesting curiosity that it grows like this. And with that, I think I'm 3 minutes late. So this is what I talk about today. Deterministic waves, then a model with stochasticity, how this relates to known models in physics, in particular the scaling exponents and scaling relations, and then a little intermezzo with fractals and show like how we could compute the fractal exponent for this specific epidemiological model. Tomorrow I'll be changing gear a little bit. I'll talk about complex multi-community SAIR model, and I'll give one flavor of it, which is how you can use measurements to reduce the complexity of these big multi-community SAIR models. And the second flavor I would give is, well, if you don't have measurements, maybe you can think of those big contact matrices Renato introduced yesterday as a random matrix. And maybe you know some of those random matrix ensemble properties, and you can use them to understand the epidemics better. And so if you have any questions, please feel free. Yes. How do we model what? So the simulation, how do they what? The front? The front is really, so the simulation is always the same, is this first model I showed in the beginning, where you had, is this. So all the simulations from there to the end are simulated from this type of model, and then like the relationship, the interface, and the properties is that every time you can just say, well, I'm constructing what is the interface like this, right? And then I'm studying its properties. All right, great.